So most players are mid-championship now with their J teams, so we thought it would be a good time to bring on a performance dietitian. So Eva Hoey, thanks so many for coming on today. How are you keeping?
I'm great. Thanks very much for having me on, Kevin. It's great.
It's a busy enough time of year for you, I'd imagine, at the moment with club championship, and then you're probably working with a good few different sports as well. So there's a lot on, is there?
There's definitely a lot on. You're getting some stragglers come in now as they're approaching. Some are their first kind of round, and then there's some that are have a good few games. But definitely, the past couple of months has been extremely busy with just trying to get different players in, and even people coming even from county setups as well. As they finished, I had a couple of camogie players and then a couple of intercounty footballers and hurlers as well. So it's been busy, and then obviously there's so much different sport that's on in the European summer, and then in Australia too, you have lots of marathons and stuff happening. So it's great to be busy, but even coming into this time of year from a football perspective, is you're just trying to tighten the screws, as you very much know yourself.
Yeah. And I was watching the webinar you put out a few weeks ago around Fueling for Championship, and some really good insights in that. But like there's so much information for players online now. Is it almost an overload of stuff that they actually want things simplified for them? Because there's a host of places you can go now. You can get lots of info around getting the nutrition right. But do you feel do athletes have a better idea now around it, or is it kind of information overload?
I think there's a little bit of a mixed bag. I think nutrition is becoming more the forefront of teams, that they're getting nutritionists in and they're getting some form of support. But sometimes there's nearly too much information and no application. Like within a team, there's there's so many different players with so many different jobs, and it's trying to figure out how does it actually apply within their life, because all the people that are coming to me, a lot of them have a lot of the information, but there's like, I don't know how to figure this out for myself. So no number from a carb target for a carb loading is really going to help them whenever they can't even cook or they don't know how to prepare for themselves. So I think there's a little bit of both. I think the information without the application, it doesn't really mean anything, and then being able to apply it, but feeling like they have lots of gaps in their knowledge, there's that side of it too. So I definitely think it's becoming more apparent how important nutrition is from a performance perspective, but I still think there's a huge missing link between understanding what you need for match day versus your everyday demands.
Yeah, I get you. And like, would you say what would be the main areas that you would find? Say we're just talking about GA players specifically for a minute. I know that's a lot of people that you would work with, but what would be the biggest things that they're still getting wrong, or the most common issues they have?
I'd say from an overarching perspective is probably under fueling. Um, just looking at match day in isolation while not thinking of their full training week. So a lot of people will come to me and say, Eva, I have my match day stuff absolutely nailed down. And I say, okay, well, what do you do? Well, I carb load. And I say, well, what does that mean for you? He's like, eating more carbs and 24 hours beforehand. I'm like, right, in comparison to what? Like, how much more are you eating in comparison to your typical training? They're like, I'm actually not too sure. So the accumulation of fatigue is coming from the earlier stages of their week, or they're really focusing on getting the match day stuff right, and then their match day plus one, it's just neglection. And that very much rolls into their Tuesday evening training session when they're on their pitch and they're feeling flat, where for the majority of cases, if they have matches every weekend, you have a very quick turnaround time, and that Tuesday evening pitch session is going to be really important to figure out what went wrong, what do they need to improve on, and getting the most out of their session, because the Thursday session is very much maybe a kick around or a puck about and getting themselves ready for the weekend. So it's match day is very much in isolation and not thinking of the rest of their week and how can I actually get better? How can I make sure that I am recovered well to get back in the best possible position come the following weekend? So I think it's an underfueling or mismanaging what their intake actually is in regards to their training output. So they don't even know what the demands of their session is. They don't know how much carbohydrates that they need. But it generally comes down to, I know time can sometimes be a little bit of a pawn off, but all these girls and lads, they're working full time or they're students. So if they're a student in the summer, great. If you're working full time, you're maybe going from working in a corporate environment straight to the training ground, or you could be an electrician or a chippy that you're on your feet all day. You could be a nurse doing shift work. And it's like understanding how does nutrition actually sandwich into their day to make it easier for them. And that's why the information is great, but the application is so important because it's not just training that they're doing. There's so much stuff outside of that time that really needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, so I suppose that's probably the value of, say, working with someone like you in a one-on-one capacity, that why players will understand, okay, I need to hit X amount of calories here if I want to, drop a bit of body fat, or I need a carb load before games. But so you'd actually break it down based on, say, their schedule or their job, when they're leaving work, what time they need to arrive at training, all that sort of stuff. That's the detail you go into?
Yeah, you really do have to get into the weeds because they know that they need to fuel, but it's like what's actually standing in their way of doing it? It's the everyday things. And like people that want to perform better and that's their goal of getting fitter, faster, and stronger. It's not generally that the goal they get frustrated with not hitting. It's the stuff that they know that they need to do, which is the everyday practices that they're still not doing because they can't figure out how to get it done. So if I was working with someone, I would literally just look at their week, look at their schedule, and begin from the very, very bottom of where is a space to actually do it. Because you could go, I'm going to do a big food shop. I'm going to make sure that I'm hitting all these amount of carbohydrates or get these lovely meals sorted. And then you're training on a Tuesday night, you plan to make this dinner, you're not home until 10 o'clock, and you're like, what do I do next? So it's actually about figuring out where is a space across your week to actually do the things that you know is going to be beneficial, or where is the days where you can't do it, and how can we prepare for those days in advance? And we understand that for, let's say, the majority of people, their weeks won't look too different week on week. So then we'll find the pockets of space where we can actually get this done. And when they find the value in doing it, whenever they have it done, they see the benefits in their energy, their mood, their recovery, they're feeling good, then they'll want to repeat that. And it's very much a rinse and repeat process then. But whenever you're a little bit stuck of what do I need to do and how do I do it, it can just feel like there's a list of things that need to be done. And some weeks you'll do it, some weeks you won't. And the more stressed you are, generally the nutrition side will just disappear.
Yeah, and I would have found myself when I was just traveling back, say from Dublin back to Tullamore for training, that it's the days where you don't have anything planned. You're eating on the roads. Naturally going into shops, and you're just not going to get the same sort of nutritious value from the food you're getting in there. And they're the days then where you really feel the difference. When you're not actually prepared enough beforehand.
100%. If you speak to any professional athlete or someone that's on top of their game and you ask them, what does your training week look like this week? They'll be able to rhyme it off. And they're like, right, how are you going to fuel around that? They'll just be able to rhyme it off because it's just repetition. But if you leave it to last minute of your choice, you're going to end up with convenience, or your tiredness, your stress, and your hunger is generally going to dictate your choice. Because, like you said, if you're on the road on the way down and you don't have the availability of those foods, the next stop is the petrol station. And sometimes that's okay, but we're trying to make that incidence happen less.
Yeah, definitely. I do have a lot of listener questions that I want to get to in a bit, but I suppose just to go back over your career at the start, Eva, like I think you started off as a clinical dietitian for a couple of years, then you've now gone into the current role working more with athletes. Can you just talk about like what actually attracted you to, say, the performance and nutrition angle of this, working with athletes and team sport?
Course. So yeah, my undergraduate degree is in dietetics. So I studied in Ulster University for 4 years, graduated in I think it was 2020. And within, I suppose, a lot of undergraduate degrees, you do all this theory, and that was for 3 years. And then the fourth year, you're in placement for the whole year. And whenever I was in placement, I was like, it was very soon. I was like, oh, well, this is different to what I kind of thought it would be. Extremely clinical, extremely medical, very much diet in related to disease and malnutrition and overnutrition, and very much dealing with like if it was oncology patients and whatnot. So my I suppose me growing up, I was doing every single sport. I suppose Gaelic football was a little bit more of my who I was and my identity, and very much in our family home. And I think every weekend we were at different games. My dad was involved with Monaghan, so that was my childhood, being at matches. And then my brothers and my sister was very much into athletics, so it was a conversation around our house. So even whenever I was younger, like 13, 14, 16, underage, you're beginning to question. I go, why do some days do I feel great and other days I just feel so flat? And I actually, I remember on under 12's final, this is how far back it went. I had my first calf cramp, went down like on my back. It was an extra time, and I was like, I thought I was dying. And the question around it was it salt? Was it this and that? And like you begin to become a little bit more curious, and then you see what I would have saw my brothers doing different things, and it was always and I think it's the same thing that's still going on. Is like eat pasta before your game, you'll feel good. So that was always kind of in the kind of pre-match preparation, but it was still kind of ongoing thing of some days I felt good, some days I didn't. And it was probably just mismanaging my fueling intake, but I didn't really understand it then. So in secondary school, when you're trying to figure out what do you want to do, I was having conversations, and it's very hard to get even a dietetic placement because obviously patient confidentiality in private practice, you're not going to be sitting in. Anyway, it's what I wanted to do. So I went and got into it between that and dentistry, which is very different. I knew it was kind of medical that I wanted to get into. So as I went through then in university, in the clinical setting, really enjoyed it. Steep learning curve. There was so much aspects of it that I never really would have thought of, but there was still questions where I was like, I still can't answer the things where I actually went into this course to do, and it was very much sport related. So as I graduated, then I was in with work. It was COVID year. I think I was graduated in the June, and I started working in the July. It was a very quick turnaround time, and I actually really enjoyed the work, but I still had questions over how do I actually even feel my training. At that point, I was doing more CrossFit type training, and again, probably feeling like I was not making any progress. So I had to make the decision. I was seeing people online doing sports nutrition. I didn't have a clue. People were asking me, how do I feel? And I was like, I have absolutely no idea. I can tell you how to tube feed someone, but I can't tell how to get someone onto the pitch and be feeling good. So I went and did my master's in sports nutrition, and I started full-time work in July. I started my full-time master's in September and did them basically back to back. It was very full on. Um, the master's was again a lot of theory. There was no placement. So I did that September, the whole way through to September. So I basically just knuckled down, did what I could to get through the course. There was a lot of repetition from even my undergraduate degree, even around the pathophysiology and all the kind of sciencey stuff. The application of the actual sports nutrition, it was very much of like what you would kind of read online. This is the grams of carbohydrates. This is how you deal with different type of sports. But then like you know yourself, there's difference between learning something and applying it to real people that have lots of different things that are going on. So I finished that up in September, and I remember just saying, Jesus, what do I do with this? Like, what? I've absolutely no placement. I have no experience. I have this degree, and I don't know how I'm going to use it. And I suppose in Ireland, within sports and I suppose sports nutrition, it's a very small world. There's GAA, there's the rugby, so there's Leinster, there's Leinster, Munster, Ulster, and then when it comes to and Connacht, then it comes to the IRFU. Outside of that, there's Sport Ireland, and then you're kind of stuck. So to get even experience within those areas, it's very few and far between. In England, yeah, a little bit more. So someone that I had followed online, really looked up to, was Daniel Davy. He was in with Dublin, Leinster, had his online platform, and I suppose that was someone that I probably really had looked up to, and what kind of got me thinking about performance nutrition, that it was possible, and the creativity around it. So I contacted Daniel. I suppose I really wanted to learn, and I didn't know how to kind of move on from that. So I contacted Daniel, and very lucky he got back to me. We had a couple of conversations and he took me under his wing, which I am forever grateful for, because it's probably the practitioner that I am today. I always had him in my corner. So I was working full time. I was doing a little bit of work for him, basically just going on team meetings, seeing what I could do. And that kind of progressed on across the next year, where I was doing a little bit more for him. I was living in Belfast at the time, and I he was like, "I'm going to get you in with my local club team," which was Ballyboden, which was be a very good football team. So I was working a little bit with the lads, with Daniel in my corner, helping me out, doing group sessions, some one-on-one support. And like, I had so much experience working with one-on-ones, I suppose, from the clinical background, which, so someone that just goes into performance nutrition, they probably don't know how to actually break down what the person needs. So I had that, and that was really going to stand to me, and still does. So whenever I was going into that setting, it was definitely nerve-wracking, but I knew I was ready to be a part of a team like that. And things led on. I was doing some underage work, and then it came to the following, I suppose, the maybe October, and Dublin Hurling had contacted, and it was basically baptism of fire. I was going in. So that transition, then I kind of went from working full time in clinical, then so as a full year with Daniel, sorry, and then the following year I started doing a little bit of work with a club team. I had previously done some work with the likes of Inniskeen, in Monaghan too. Then I went kind of part-time. I was locuming in Belfast, and then I went full-time with Daniel and Dublin Hurling too. So that was around kind of the 2-year mark after after getting my degree, which I think even the timeline, it's probably fair. A lot of people will probably be struggling to look for work, or they go into a job, or they go into basically a club team or a county setup with this degree, and they actually don't know how to apply it. And I think it's, you have to set standards going into a team like that. But if you don't know what the standards actually, what they should look like, then you can be a little bit lost. So I was ready to take that on. And again, baptism of fire, but it was an unbelievable experience. And I think being in that setting allows me to do the work that I have done today, because there's lots of different footballers or hurlers come through, but then a lot of different team sports. From, I have a couple of professional soccer players and whatnot. It's understanding what goes on in the background, not actually just the nutrition stuff. That's actually really, really important.
Yeah, yeah, and it's similar to S&C in a way as well. It's like you have all this in theory, this is how you should train, and then you come into a team and you could have half the team are playing hurling, so they're not there every second week. So it's about trying to fit the S&C work into a schedule that fits as well. But I want to ask you about like Daniel. I'm working with him because like he was probably the first one in that industry in Ireland as a with a focus on like nutrition for athletes that I remember seeing online. I'm curious, like, what was his processes like, say, when you go into like a county setup or even with Ballyboden? What were the things that you would have learned from him in the early days around how you actually run, say, your job in that sort of environment, what it actually looks like?
Yeah. So um Daniel is a great leader, and for everyone that's working for him, he has his way of doing things, but he doesn't want you to do it his way. So I suppose, like, you'd be listening, you'd be in conversation, and I suppose he would challenge you in different situations of basically to be yourself, um, and have your version of doing things rather than just being a parrot of him. Because, like, if you were to, if someone is being authentic or not. If you've used some, basically, if you had a slideshow and you used someone's slides, you wouldn't be able to actually present it. It has to be your own. So I suppose it was me being really curious and constantly asking questions about, how did you do this, and how did that happen, and then kind of understanding the dynamic. And Daniel was very much it's not just about nutrition, and it's really about the player, and it's about the setting, and it's about the psychology around your nutrition too, because eating is a learned behavior, and it has to be taught in a different way, and understand the value of cooking and being able to do it yourself. So for me, going into a setting like that, nutrition from optics looks like supplements and looks like basically skinfuls. That's what you think about. What does nutrition come in and do? But it's getting all the players to be at the same level from a knowledge perspective, and then setting the standards of what you expect from them, from even like a hydration test perspective, from a body composition side, which you're very much liaising with the S&C. But then it's also the psychology around that. Like if I'm looking at um like Gaelic footballers now in club settings, a lot of it is doubt around their intake, which then can have a knock-on effect as it comes into their performance. Because if you're standing on the pitch in the warm-up and you feel like you're heavy-legged, like they're thinking, oh God, have I fueled enough? Like, was that enough? Was this too much? And why do I feel that way? So it's about really building their confidence around their preparation and understanding what really works for them. So within, I suppose, the county setup, and I was learning from Daniel, it was very much me soundboarding the stuff that I was doing and him giving me a little bit of support around that. I mean, like, just keep going like you would do. And from a strength and condition or a nutrition perspective, if you know that you're on the right track, you'll keep hammering it. Or if you're unsure, it's so good to be able to have that conversation with someone, especially so earlier on in your career. Like, as in a clinical setting, whenever I was a student, you had someone with you the whole time and asking, is this right? Or how could I do that better? That's what he was for me. He was very much a mentor and a leader. And he was obviously in two extremely successful teams. So, he was on the right track. And I really valued his opinion too. But his feedback was always very constructive, and he was someone that I appreciated what he said, and we could always kind of make things better.
Yeah. And I wonder then, was that like seeing how he had built a business through growing an online following as well? Like, I'm not sure when you started really taking social media seriously, but did that sort of influence you as well, that you were kind of looking at him going, I'd like to do something similar myself in terms of building my own brand and having my own business as well on the back of that?
It was never something that I initially had thought of. So whenever I finished up in my placement with dietetics, it was actually COVID. So we got kicked out basically in May, and then we had to do everything online. And I remember the day that we got kicked out, I was like, what am I going to do with myself? I'm someone that just needs to keep themselves busy. And I started an Instagram page, which is now kind of my platform. And I just started to put some things together that I was learning through my placement and seeing other dietitians online that I really would have looked up to. I was like, that's something that I would love to do. And I remember having a conversation with the dietitian, because we would have done general medicine outpatient clinics. I was like, I actually really enjoy the outpatient stuff more than being on the wards. I remember asking me, what would you like to do? I was like, I think I would like to have a private clinic. I think that's what I think I'd like to do. Um, because the ward, yeah, great, but I really enjoy the continuity of care, of actually seeing someone from the beginning to end. And there's a huge turnaround in a hospital setting, and the patients are can be extremely sick. They are, or they can be in there for a long period of time. So you're with them for a period of time, then they go to maybe to the community setup, and you don't know what's happening. So if you're sick, probably the last thing you want to do is eat, or you can be like very nauseous, and the hospital food does not help with that. So you're going in giving help and advice of, this is what you should do here, this is what you should do at home, but you actually don't know what their whole setup is. So I thought, if someone was coming to you and really wanting to seek support, they're going to want to be locked in a little bit more than poor creator that's in hospital for a UTI that is really malnourished. So it's looking at it from that side. Um, and I suppose the online platform was probably more for me to kind of keep myself occupied, and it kind of grew legs. I was enjoying doing it. I was enjoying putting stuff out there, and people were saying that was great. So it was just a little bit more of a hobby for me. And I knew what online could potentially unfold, because you can hit a reach of anyone across the world. And I thought, you know what, this could be something that could work. But I never really thought of it as a job perspective or being able to get clients. For me, it was just putting out information. If I didn't have my own business in the morning, it's probably something that I would still do, because I actually enjoy the work. The editing, not so much. But giving out the information, I actually really enjoy. So seeing Daniel do that, I suppose his creativity around that and actually putting the information out there into really simple form is what I really liked too. I was like, I would love to be able to not replicate it, but do it in my own way.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, like obviously it's something that I'm doing as well, the online business, but it's great having the freedom then, like you're not necessarily tied anywhere. You're in obviously Sydney at the moment. You can come back home for a period of time and you're not kind of asking for time off and all that sort of stuff. How do you find it when I don't know if you worked with many teams then since you've gone out fully on your own online? How do you find balancing both of those or do you do much of that?
At the moment, I'm not working with any teams in isolation. I would have done quite a bit of that at home, even. I was at Scotstown in Cullyhanna, as well as working with Dublin, and then all the other stuff that David Nutrition and Daniel and the team had done. So there was lots of online between group work and then corporate stuff too. So there was lots going on whenever I was in Ireland, coming out here um within teams. So I transitioned over, and dietetics or dietitian is very much a protected term over here. So, for me to be recognized, I had to do my whole transfer of basically an accreditation, and they do it twice a year, once in March and once in September. So I moved over in January, and moving over, you don't really realize how much it upends your whole life. So I was just trying to get my feet off the ground, and there's actually quite a bit of studying to do. While the clinical is quite similar, their public health and their food service is very different. And I was told you really need to study for those. So I kind of missed the March intake, and I was like, right, I'm gonna have to wait till September. It was kind of when the gun gets put to your head, it's like, I have to make this work. So for working with teams over here, I could go into a GAA club no problem because it's very much like at that amateur level, but there's no funding when it comes to that. Everyone's here more for fun. Like I suppose the Gaelic football over here and hurling is incredible. Like there's so much county footballers and camogie players and whatnot over here, but you're not going to be in a similar setting at all. So I was a little bit stuck. Really wanted to kind of go down maybe the avenue of AFL or NRL, but I applied for some jobs and they don't even look at your application or it's like, do you have your accreditation over here? No, well then, sorry, that it's just a funnel. So I'm actually in that process of doing that now, funnily enough, because I'm really enjoying the online work, but I still have a little bit of the grad to get back into kind of the team setting too. So potentially down the line, I don't know what will take me, where it'll take me, but online is extremely busy at the moment, which I'm very grateful for. So it's just a matter of trying to weigh off both of the things.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do find the same as well that you could just focus purely online, but there is a different sort of buzz you get from actually being involved with a team and being in there with a group in the evenings. So I definitely resonate with that. I just want to get to a few questions then we have. Like obviously there was a lot of questions some players sent in. I think you're probably used to answering similar enough questions anyway. I'd imagine it's all similar stuff GA players are coming out with. But the first one, like the big thing is still around carb loading. There seems to be a lot of everyone's kind of aware now that they need to carb load, but sometimes you'll ask a player, what if you carb loaded and they just had some extra pasta before the game? Like so what should that actually look like, say, for a player leading into a big championship game?
Yeah. So when you look at, if we think about what is actually carb loading, so carb loading is just having a number of carbohydrate rich meals in the lead up to the match. Why you do that is because our bodies can store a small amount of carbohydrates in our body, enough to fuel around 60 to 90 minutes of high intensity exercise. So a game is around 70 minutes. If you're not, if you don't have enough carbs basically stored in your body, what you're going to do is you're going to hit the red zone and you're just not going to have the energy to perform. Carb loading. So whenever we eat carbs, it takes a little bit of time for them to be digested and actually stored in our body. And they're stored in our muscles and our liver as a thing called glycogen. So it's not that the meal that you eat beforehand is going to fuel your match. It's this accumulation across, we'd say, the 24 hours beforehand. Thinking about it like charging your phone on a really, really slow charger. It's going to go from like the bottom to the next level, to the next level, to the next level. So if you're only thinking about eating beforehand and your carb stores, let's say you train on Thursday, they're already diminished from, let's say, 60 minutes on the pitch. It takes time for basically that to be refueled or recharged back up. That pre-match meal is going to bring you from 90% to 100%. So it's only that small target. But what I generally see from a carb loading perspective is people say carb loading, great, eat a shit ton more than what they usually do and loads of extra carbohydrates, which generally leads them to feel really full, sluggish, bloated, some form of digestive issues. And then some will just go, carb loading doesn't work for me. Or they can get onto the pitch and feel like there's weights on their legs. So it's actually being able to understand your carb loading shouldn't look really different in comparison to your training day intake. So whenever you look at the numbers associated with carb loading, for a GAA player, it's around 6 to 8 grams of carbs per kilo of your body weight. So let's say, for example, an 85 kilo player, that's probably around, let's say, I think maybe around 450 to 500 grams. But for their training day, it's probably around maybe 400. So there's a difference in 100 grams of carbohydrates. So I would be saying for anyone is you really need to look at what your typical day actually looks like from a training day. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, and maybe 2 to 3 snacks. Carb loading is always the rule of threes and the 24 hours beforehand. So 3 main meals and 3 high carb snacks. And what you do is basically sprinkle extra carbs across your typical meals. So it's not a major change in what you're generally having. If you're going to maybe having a small breakfast to, let's say, a bagel at lunch, then to pasta in the evening time, and then your load looks like cereal, bagel, juice, mid-morning snack, you're having loads of things. Like, think about your stomach. Like that digestive load is really not going to sit well with you. So I'd be looking at what are you doing day to day and how can we add extra carbs to your meals without adding lots of extra volume. And that will generally come from the simple carbs. So like your fruit juices, your sports drinks, your cereal bars, your pancakes, your cereal. Maybe whenever you're having pasta, you might add a little bit of garlic bread. If you're having a yogurt bowl, you might swap that to maybe just something carb based. So it shouldn't look too different to your norm, but you're always doing it that 24 hours beforehand to basically charge yourself up. Then on your match day, you can eat a little bit more comfortably, because a lot of people might experience some digestive issues, and especially around championship, because there's a little bit more pressure, can come nerves, and nerves can impact your digestion. So you don't want to be like, okay, I'm going to have a really good day of fueling. Let's say if you have an 8 o'clock match the day of your game and the morning comes and your stomach is upside down, you're in the toilet and you're like, shit, I was supposed to eat a lot today. So you don't want to leave it to last minute. So I'd always say no matter what time your game is, your match day -1 is your key day from a fueling. That will basically charge your battery up to 75%. Then match day, it's basically just manage appetite and top up. Hopefully I answered that.
That's great. Yeah, you did, and you actually answered the next one as well, because someone had asked about nerves and digestion. So match day -1 is the big one for that. Something you mentioned earlier was around the calves cramping, and they're like, it's something I'm not even sure if sometimes is it because the players haven't hydrated enough, or have they taken electrolytes? So what is sort of best practice around cramping? Does nutrition or hydration play a massive role in that, or can it be a number of factors?
Um, it can play a role in it, but calf cramping is really multifactorial, as you know, within your side too, Kevin, that when it comes from calf cramping, it really depends when is it happening in the game. So if you are like, so when it comes from a multifactorial perspective, you can look at, has there been a change in ground surface? Um, then if it's happening really early on in the game, is it just over excitation of your muscle tissues? That can be managed a little bit, even from, you can use pickle juice for that. If it is really early on in the game, again, you're looking at the calf strength. So if that's happening repeatedly for a player. That's what I had to work on. I was like, my calves, the calf strength was horrendous. Like, when you're doing that calf strength of like going up and down on a stair, I think I could get to like maybe like 10, and my calves were cramping. And also, like, whenever it was like you're supposed to lift, was it 2 times your body weight, even with a barbell, I couldn't even do 5 kilo dumbbells. So like my calf strength was really poor. If it's coming to the latter stages of the game, it can definitely be down to conditioning of the calf too, because it's contact with the ground. So the more that you're contacting the ground, the more fatigue that you're going to get. There's a lack of oxygen to that area. But what can happen from a fueling perspective is, if you're under fueled, and especially, let's say you've only half carb loaded, you're in the red zone, you've 15 minutes to go. That's where you generally see it in extra time. But if you don't have enough fuel in the tank, you're overreaching. So you have nothing there to give, and the lack of oxygen to that area is the first point of contact. So it's the lowest extremity, basically, from your heart. So you're going to be under fueled, and also hydration too. So if you're a really heavy sweater, it's still hot in Ireland at the moment, and you're a salty sweater too, you're using electrolytes, and electrolytes are a thing that can impact basically that muscle contraction. So that would be very much in the latter stages. Hydration, fueling, and condition of the calf can come in. If it's really early on, again, you're looking at condition, but you're also looking at the excitation. That's why if someone is panicking at the start of a game, and maybe their heart rate is jacked, what can happen is that you can just cramp, and it's not muscular, it's just like the excitation of the muscle fibers around that, as you well know.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, so it's probably a bit of psychology, nutrition, and then your kind of strength work coming into that as well, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Another player has asked around, say, caffeine on game day, and he mentioned that he heard a few years ago that the Leinster players would avoid drinking coffee, say, for 3-4 days leading up to a game, and then they might have a cup of coffee the day of the game, and the caffeine will actually hit them a bit better because their tolerance is reduced. Is there any truth in that at all? What would you recommend? Say if a player does drink coffee most days, are they going to get much benefit from increasing caffeine dose on game day?
I've actually never heard of that before, so I can't give you an absolute answer there. But I'd say for majority of people, if they are a regular consumer of caffeine and they stop taking it a couple of days beforehand, they might have a sore head. Now
Yeah.
that being said, everyone will have a different caffeine tolerance. So if you generally have like one black coffee a day, you're probably very much tolerant around that. If you have two and then three, there's very much kind of that bell-shaped curve of like tolerance, like kind of hidden tolerance, kind of performance, where it can kind of help that reduce that perception of fatigue. But then there's the other side where you can get jitters and your heart can be racing. So I wouldn't be saying to change anything. If someone was saying that to me, I would say keep your normal practices and practice your caffeine intake around your games, because you don't want anything to put you on the opposite side of that bell-shaped curve, because that will just have a negative impact on your performance. Now, if it was someone around the likes of a match day, I would generally use, for a lot of team sport or even from an endurance perspective, is maybe not using like liquid forms of caffeine, that maybe using the likes of the chewing gum. Because let's say, for example, if you are someone with a sensitive gut and you find that you do have loose bowels, or your stomach is like, you kind of have that nervous kind of feeling in your stomach, caffeine is a stimulant, which means it'll stimulate movement through your gut. So I'd be saying caffeine is definitely one of those supplements that can definitely help with performance. Your kind of delayed onset of fatigue, or that perception of fatigue. So you can push a little bit harder, but you need to kind of know your tolerance level to that. So I'd say I wouldn't change anything really in the lead up, but then the type of caffeine that you're using, depending on what your tolerance is, and then how much that you're using. So if someone drinks 5 coffees a day and they're taking maybe less of that before a game, they probably need to match that. But I'd also be saying the timing of your game is important. So like, I'd always say, is the juice worth the squeeze? If it's an evening game, caffeine is going to impact your sleep. But sometimes I suppose it's needed, and other times if it was a train, I'd be like, absolutely avoid it.
Yeah, brilliant. Another player has asked, and this is an interesting one around, say they're talking about when you get into the dressing room on game day and there's Lucozade Sport there available for players, there's wine gums and Jaffa cakes as well. Um, when should he, or what sort of, when should he be taking the Lucozade Sport? First of all, is it better pre-game or half-time, or even after the game for recovery? And then he was wondering around like wine gum consumption and Jaffa cakes as well. Should you be taking much at half-time? What's the kind of best practice around that?
Mm. Really good question. So when it comes from the likes of like your carbohydrates, once you kind of come into the dressing room, I'd be saying you should be ready to go. Like you're carb loaded, your preparation is there, you should feel really confident, you're focused, and nutrition isn't something that you're worrying about because has already been mapped out across your week. You know what your match day -1 is, you know when you're going to have your pre-match meal, etc. So when it comes into the changing room, it should just be about kind of your top up level. If I was to look at a sports drink, it has your fluid, it has electrolytes, and has carbohydrates. And it's very easy on the stomach too. And it's also a sports product. So I would be utilizing that over anything. You're just topping up your hydration, you're topping up a little bit of carbs, but it's not going to cause any kind of digestive issues. Do you have it before your game or during your game? You can have it at both. Um, so you're kind of using it just kind of for a hydration perspective, but I'd be saying at halftime you should absolutely be using it. So we're thinking about our tank and the battery. We've carb loaded well. At halftime you're at 50%. So what you're trying to do is buffer that system, give yourself a little bit of extra carbs. Let's say if you're at 45%, you don't want the last 15 minutes of your game to be at 5 or at 0%. So that carbs in the sports drink basically just buffers that system. You're plugging yourself in again, giving yourself a little bit of extra carbs, but you're also giving yourself electrolytes and salts that's going to be lost through sweat. So I'd say top line at halftime is fluid, carbs, electrolytes. How you can get that is through a sports drink. Now, 30 grams of carbohydrates is what you're aiming for, and that's like 500 mils of like a Lucozade or a Powerade. For some people, they'll struggle to get that in. If it's a little bit warmer, of course, it's a little bit easier. Um, but I know even from a club perspective, as you come into maybe October, November time, if you get into that stages, it can get a lot very cold, and the consumption of water can definitely come down, or fluid. So that's where the kind of other things can come into play, the likes of your wine gums or your Jaffa cakes. But I'd be very mindful of how much that you take in, because whenever you're training and you're or even in a game, it's high intensity. Your blood is flowing away from your gut to your working muscles, which can impact your digestion and that gut permeability. That's why in endurance sport you can see people that they need to go to the toilet. So that gut permeability is very much kind of dampened down. It's very easy to take a handful of jellies, knock them back, and feel kind of sick. So I'd be always go fluid first with carbs, and then you can have a little bit of a carb top up. I'd probably go with the likes of your jelly babies because there's more carbs in a less portion. And that would be very much like two or three. If I was looking at a sports product and someone would really struggle to get through 500 mils of a sports drink, I'd probably look at the likes of a gel. And that doesn't need to be a full gel. It could be half of a gel and 200 mils of a sports drink. So the combination of those two things together, you're getting around the 30 grams of carbs. A Jaffa cake, again, probably a little bit harder to digest than the jellies, albeit it's still a good option. Some people have a good gut that they can tolerate things. So there's no right or wrong. It's really down to preference and what you've practiced. So within a changing room, you'll have lads that will be electrolytes in a gel. There will be one that will have a sports drink by itself. Someone will have half a gel and a sports drink. Other will just be some people that they can't even tolerate water. So you're just trying to get something into them. So it's really individual, and I'd say practice and training before you kind of get into that kind of match day.
Yeah, and I think it's always a good habit of sort of reflecting or making notes after and seeing what worked well for you or how you felt, and then you kind of nail down your process then, and you can stick to that as you go forward as well. Just the last one for you, Eva. I think like just around obviously post game as well and recovery, it's a big side of it. You know, some players will talk about finding it hard to eat, say late at night after training if they've had a late training session or a commute after, whatever. What's the advice around nutrition to sort of have the body recover after a tough training or a game.
Yeah. Bottom line is something is always better than nothing. And for a majority of teams, like they might be training at 7, sometimes it can be 8 o'clock. So the start is late and the finish can be really late when they're trying to unwind, get into bed and get themselves back up the next morning to get to work. So ideally for a training day, I'd be saying for most people, I'd say trying to actually have all of your main meals had before your training. So I would probably look at breakfast, mid-morning snack. If you struggle from a digestion perspective, if you prefer having something lighter before your training, I would go your dinner type meal at lunchtime and a lighter meal at around kind of that 4 or 5 o'clock mark. So that will get a good amount of energy, calories, carbs in beforehand. Then you can go for maybe a top up snack. It could be a Nature Valley bar or simply a sports drink or a banana. And then after your session, you're not trying to get a huge amount in. Now, in a county setup, you'll have your food for a majority of counties that a lot of the lads will be able to eat. For a club, a lot of them don't have that novelty. So I would be saying really simple options. If you really struggle with your appetite, simply a smoothie made with milk, protein powder, and the likes of your berries. You're hitting carbs, you're hitting protein, and you're getting lots of antioxidants from your berries, which will help with inflammation, help with your recovery. So you're hitting all bases. Again, simply scrambled eggs on toast. You could have a pint of milk and a bowl of cereal. It could be beans on toast. You could make a sandwich or a wrap. It's not trying to overcomplicate it or be standing at the kitchen in the cooker at 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the evening. I would say go for something that's really easy. Even a bagel and a banana and a pint of milk is absolutely perfect. I would say for majority, like the smoothie option can be a really nice one, especially if you're getting hammered in training and your stomach is just not good. It's really easy to digest and you don't need to panic about sitting down to a full meal. Also, a lot of people will find that full meal might impact their sleep, which from a recovery perspective is fundamental. So it's like, what can we do to just help that? Like a protein milk and a cereal bar is definitely better than nothing. Very easy on the stomach and you can knock that back in no time.
Do you want to just give your social media details there if people want to reach out and get in touch with you?
Of course, on Instagram it is Eva Hoey Nutrition. That's probably the best way to find me. And if you're interested in working one-on-one, in my link in bio, there is a little bit of register your interest form. You can just put down what you're curious about, what your current challenges are, and I'll be able to get back to you. Also, you can get me in LinkedIn too, and that's just under Eva Hoey.
Perfect. And I will link your details in the show notes as well. So for anyone who do listen to it straight up. So, but Eva, thanks a million for coming on today. Really appreciate it.